Welcome back. You're still watching Business Morning on Channels Television, and we're broadcasting live from Lagos, Nigeria. In the last couple of minutes, we've been looking at the recent WTO trade agreement and implications for Nigeria. We know that 159 member countries of the WTO agreed to 3 packages, which includes the fact that
160 now, because
160
Yemen was admitted to this very particular.
Very good. So we have 160 members now of the World Trade Organization. And they agreed that there was going to be trade liberalization, agriculture, and development of least developed countries. And of course, I have here with me in the studios, Obia Amadi is an international trade consultant. And in our Abuja studios, we have the President of National Association of Nigerian Traders, Ken Wokoha. Thank you so much, Ken, for sticking around.
Thank you very much.
Well, Ken, just before we went on that short break, I mentioned that the part of the WTO agreement is on Aid for Trade initiative. It's a program that they actually run. Now, this Aid for Trade initiative is a test of the WTO's ability to work more cooperatively with a range of national, regional, and international actors, including the private sector. Now, at some point in your conversation, you actually mentioned the fact that mentioned private sector participation. Now, bringing it home, how can the private sector actually key into this initiative? Well, Ken, if you can hear me.
I think I'm losing you.
Okay, what I said was that we know that part of the agreement of the WTO is this Aid for Trade initiative, and it's a test of the WTO's ability to work more cooperatively with a range of national, regional, and international actors, including the private sector. Now, let's bring it home. How can the private sector key into this Aid for Trade initiative?
All right. I think before we look at how the private sector can key in, we must first of all also think of doing an analysis of an assessment of what the Aid for Trade package contains. You must open a package first and see what the contents are before you know how to share them. Now, if you look at the Aid for Trade package, so-called, this is one area that we also have our worries, because some of that trade agreements, that has just happened, around the corner, have also taught us some lessons that we must learn. Look at the EPA, the Economic Partnership Agreement, where some kind of, promises were made, and then also look at the EDF, the European Development Fund, where provisions were made and then promises were given, rolling to billions of euro. But today, what do you find? It appears that almost all of these things are empty shells. Why? Now, look at the Aid for Trade package. What is in there for the developing countries? There have been promises and promises and promises of this. Don't forget, in 2001, member countries of the WTO came together and they said, look, the developing countries said, look, we have been cheated for quite a long time on this particular table of negotiations. What we want to add, that will add value on us at this point is that development will be inserted into the trade, the angle, so that there will be kind of equity. But from that 2001 in Doha, which was called the Doha Development Agenda, from there to this point where we are at Bali, the same DDA, the Doha Development Agenda, is still not unraveled. It is still hanging there. How much is in this pot? Sometimes you wouldn't know. It looks like, let me use my word, abracadabra. A thing that you don't know what is in there and how it is going to be noted. I give you an instance again of the EPA, where Article 37, Paragraph 3 provides for, in the Cotonou Agreement, provides for the building of the capacity of the private sector before the negotiations of the Economic Partnership Agreement, which is a trade agreement. Why did they envisage that? It is to ensure that the private sector capacity is built. Obira talked about, standard of, products. we've talked about, making sure that we have products that are raised to international standards that can compete internationally and compete favorably for us. And these funds were meant, and the provisions of this law were meant to ensure that the capacity of the private sector was built to know how to export, to know how to make sure they process their goods, to ensure how they package their goods, and all of this. But I ask you, till today, how many private sector practitioners have had their capacity built through such funds? Where did you even see those funds? Now, when you were talking about some of these funds, you discover that at the end of the day, even on the table, before you know it, it is their own people, their own so-called intellectuals, experts, that will come to tell you what and what you will put the money for. Sometimes they will drive away from that particular area where you have your needs that will reduce poverty for the people. And I will tell you, put it in HIV/AIDS. Well, of course, HIV/AIDS is a good thing to fight. They will tell you, put that fund in providing such heckling things. But why? How would such funds get to the private sector that needs the fund? How would the capacity be built in making sure that you can produce, and then your basket of commodity will be enough to export? It is not there. It is not there. And I think this is a challenge to Nigeria. Not just looking at the trade funding. We must look inwards. Look at what the Minister of Agriculture is doing right now. The Growth Enhancement Scheme. It didn't require aid for trade, but now people are going back. Cassava Bread Initiative is an initiative that is homegrown. The Growth Enhancement Scheme is an initiative that is homegrown. These are subsidies, sort of. If we can look inwards and provide more funding, adequate funding from our parliament, all the kind of proposals that are coming up should look at what the provisions of the African Union said. 10%, the Maputo Declaration, wherein we can find enough funds by appropriation by the parliament, so that funding will go to the right channel. And then we can
Ken, just hold on to your thoughts. You actually mentioned exports. Now, over an international trade consultant, of course, when this deal is implemented, it might lead to a lowering of tariffs. Is the business of lowering trade tariffs, good or bad?
Well, it's difficult to say yes or no. It depends on which divide you are. If tariff is lower to where you are exporting, then of course it makes your export easier because there's a benefit on the other side. But if it's the other way around, it may also affect you. But the issue is what Ken said. I read something and I laughed. The Secretary General of WTO said that after this very little agreement was reached, he said for the first time that we have put the world back into WTO. That was very interesting because what was beginning to happen was that nations were beginning to return to region and sub-regional agreements was taking over. And I think the WTO was started, which was part of why this agreement was very, very important. Because, ECOWAS, SADC, NAFTA, all around the world, agreements even between countries, between regions, region and all that. So the issue of tariff, Ken talked about, because it brings us to the issue of competitiveness. It is because of competitiveness that some of the funds that he mentioned were supposed to be, so that you can go back to the developing countries, use those funds, build the capacity of people to be able to break into this. So there are certain countries, if you are doing, let's say, food and drugs, their food and drugs administration are so tight that people need capacities built before they can break into those places. So I think aid for trade doesn't even sound good to me because, it's aid and it is trade. I think development, just like Ken said, development agenda as far as trade is concerned should be the key. Helping, and again, at the end of the day, must we wait for people to come and help us? We need to help ourselves. We have capacity to help ourselves. Regional groups have capacity to do something. He mentioned about the percentage that African Union agreed that must be available for agriculture. Are we adhering to those things? Because these are things that will increase our development from one point to other. So I think we will look at this aid for trade again, almost like a Greek gift, and be careful what we get and make sure that. But if we could turn within and then apply some homegrown strategies, I'm sure we can get over all this. But I think maybe we should start by building capacity of people in the public sector who are the ones sitting on these policies and the rest of them, because that will help us. That will help us, because you have bright ideas, you put it through. If it doesn't go through, I'll give you an example. I spoke to the people in Export Promotion Council. That was almost 9 years ago. And I said, you don't have a National Export Institute that will help to build capacity. At least as a government, if you have it, you have capacity to put one regional this thing in any all the this thing. And someone in the ministry said Nigeria was not ripe for that
9 years ago.
Yes.
So
and even now, we were more than ripe at the point in time, because look at India and other countries. You have capacity. People are to 1 week, 2 weeks courses. Some of them highly subsidized. That's why you see a high level of expertise. And we need to do this, because it's not all about the developed world cannot just open their door for your goods to be pouring into that place. Then you shut your own in the pretext of saying you don't want substandard. Okay, forget substandard. Take the good ones. We are not even willing to do that. So that's the way I see it. I don't think that aid for trade is the best, because all the aids, the ones that were mapped out before, we didn't see the effect. So I don't see anything happening. We need to take our destiny into our hands.
Okay, now Ken, we're on home stretch. Just before we go, is it really in Nigeria's interest to remain in the WTO?
Have asked me this question, and my answer has remained yes and no. Yes and no in the sense that yes, where the big boys are playing, you also remain there and play along with them, and then continue. You know, it's a game. It's a game. Know that no, if technically you have done your analysis as a country, and then you find out that you are not better for it. And if I have remained in a club for more than 10 years now, and I cannot say this is what I have gained. This is the market I've assessed. This is what I've achieved through it. In terms of national economic development, then we could as well begin to think of, changing our minds. But I think, in all, it's good for us to remain there. But I think before I quit this, it's important for us to look at this issue of trade facilitation, this angle, where many people have been saying, oh, the good is good for us, it's beautiful for us. Now we have low documentation and data requirements, rapid release of goods. We also have low rate of physical inspection. We have deferred payment of duties and taxes. These are the contents of the agreement that was secured in Bali under the trade facilitation agenda. Then establishment of single window, then cooperation, interagency cooperation between Nigeria and the US, between Nigeria and European Union, between Nigeria and Canada, and all of that within the customs periphery. Now, are these what we want? These are good for us. However, if you do a typical post-mortem of this, what we are going to benefit, a cost and benefit analysis, what we will discover is that we will still remain disadvantaged. In fact, even more. Why? Because we are not going to chase any of these things, any of these rules, the adaptation according to our own level of development. We are now going to, what we are going to do now is to see how we can adapt to the WTO standard, the laid out rules. And therefore, it will require a lot of funding. Now, for you to do all of these things, it will require you human resources, financial resources, and every other resources that could have gone into other budgetary, social portfolios. But if we are going to do this, my first question is, what we are opening up is the door for more imports. What is the basket of our commodities that we are exporting outside? That's the major question. If you are facilitating trade, there are two angles, import and export. If you are facilitating trade in this angle that the WTO wants it in Nigeria today, what you are doing is opening the door more for goods to come in. What do you have in your basket as a nation to export? I think that's a question we must need to ask ourselves before those in Geneva help us to sign the dotted lines.
Well, thank you very much, Ken. Thank you so much, Ken, for joining us on the program. Ken Okoha is the President, National Association of Nigerian Traders. And just before I let you both go, gentlemen, Obera, your last words, please.
I agree with Ken. If you have more imports than you export, your balance of trade and balance of payment will obviously be in the negative. We need to work. He says, what do we have to export? I believe that we have a lot. The only thing is that it's for us to do something. 747 or is it 47 local government that we have, almost every local government in Nigeria can boast of one item that we can export. But the fact is that, again, we are doing nothing about this. And that's why at times I pray that the oil dries up and then we wake up and then face reality. So trade facilitation is good if you have ease of, but from the point that he's looking at it, which is to say, I let your goods come in, let my own come in. So you now sit back to look at, if I open my borders for your goods to flow in, do I only have something that I will also flow into your economy? So we have been an import-oriented economy for a very, very long time. That will probably worsen our situation, but that also means that we should go back to the basics.
To the drawing board.
Go back to the drawing board. We have the commodities, we have capacity to process, we can do a whole lot to increase our export.
Obera, thank you so much. It's been an interesting conversation. Obera Madu, an international trade consultant, thank you so much for joining us on the program. And Ken Okoha is the President, National Association of Nigerian Traders. He joined us live from our Abuja studios. Thank you also for joining us on the program. Well, that's today's edition of the program. Thank you for being a part of it. I'm Harriet Agbenyi.